This is Christina, Marketing Executive at Commusoft, and I would like to welcome you to our latest episode of Let's Talk. Today, well, as you very well know, we're getting on with 2021, and it would be ideal to start setting the right goals. This is why we've invited Ruth King, who is an HVAC consultant and expert in financials and planning for field service businesses. So let's get going. You earned your HVAC license in the past, Ruth, and now you work as a consultant. How did everything fall into place for you? Tell us a little bit about your story.
I started in this industry by accident, actually. I had a friend who was in grad school with me for MBA school who was working with Service America, which was a franchisor of heating and air conditioning companies, and they needed some help. So I ended up getting into this industry kind of by accident. And so I was working with Service America, learning the industry and learning how much I was helping the contractors and franchisees, and then went back out on my own after a couple of years and loved the industry. I mean, I found that people really are very nice in it. They want to do really, really good things for their customers and their employees. And they're really good technicians as a general rule, but running a business, not so much. And that's where I could come in and I could help. So I grew the business from the late 1980s until now. So it's been about 40 years since I've been working with HVAC. And a lot of HVAC contractors also work in plumbing or electrical or generators or pool and spas. So I added those because it's an industry that everybody, it's homeowners or it's businesses or whatever else it is. It's very like and aligned industries, whether it's HVAC, plumbing, electrical, generators, pool and spas, and things like that. So that's how I started.
Amazing. 40 years. Well, you must have seen a lot in your experience, and most of all, you've probably seen just the market changing and how business owners have reacted and how they've innovated and changed things, just to stay profitable, basically. Obviously, the past year has been interesting for everyone. Definitely a challenge. So before we dive into specifics exactly, I'd be really curious to know, how has your business been doing since the pandemic? Or did you change anything or adapt any strategies specifically?
The pandemic caused a lot of businesses to change, and mine changed a little bit. But we're in the U.S., at least, in an essential business. So we really didn't get shut down very much. So my client base stayed my client base. The only thing that really changed was I wasn't doing any speeches. I wasn't doing any seminars. My last seminar was February 12th, and I didn't do another one until the end of September. So a lot of the programs that I had, face-to-face, I put online. All of my marketing, my maintenance agreement programs are now online. A lot of the financial programs are now online. And I created a program called Ronan the Rubber Duck Dives into Financials, just to be a fun and whimsical way of looking at financials, which was actually kind of fun. And the light bulb went on for a whole lot of people just watching that, which made me feel good.
Amazing. It's definitely a way that has kept us together. Like you mentioned, you probably, the aspect of your job that perhaps you missed most was the interaction with people, the speeches, having a back and forth. But it's interesting because things have been moving online for a lot of businesses from a lot of points of view. And where do you think this is going? Do you think there are 3 things perhaps that will define 2021 for business leaders, especially those who are committed to increasing the revenue? So we always go price for profit, not for survival. And obviously we want to thrive. What do you think?
There are 3 things that definitely will happen, I think, in 2021. Number one, people are paying more attention to their customer base, or they should be. So one of the things that would be really important to do in 2021, or even at the end of 2020 or 2021, is to go look at your customer base and find out how many people are on that customer base who have not done business with you in the past 18 months to 5 years. And those are what I call your inactive customers. So one of the first things for 2021 would be to reactivate inactive customers, give them a reason to come back. And you guys can help a lot with that. Make sure that, there's a reason, hey, we haven't heard from you. Well, I thought you went out of business because you haven't talked to me. Well, guess what? It's like, yeah, we got to do that. So number one, focus on customer base, focus on reactivating inactive customers. The second thing that I really think is going to happen in 2021, or at least I hope that will happen in 2021, is that people will start looking at, who their customer bases actually are. I think we learned from the pandemic not to put all of our eggs in one basket. If most of your customers were, let's say, in the restaurant industry, you had a problem in 2020. So my hope and goal is that no one customer or no one industry is more than 20% of your customer base from now on. I mean, it was a really tough lesson to learn for a few of my clients who actually had a lot of their customers who were restaurants. They did food service, they did refrigeration, they did, taking care of fryers and all the other fun things, and they had to pivot. They had to find other industries that they could go on. Otherwise, their businesses would have gone out of business too. So number one would be to reactivate inactive customers. Number two would be to make sure that no more than 20% of your customer base is in any one industry or with any one customer. And the third thing that I would do is to make sure that your financial statements are accurate, make sure that they are timely, and you don't have to do the bookkeeping part. You just have to do the financial part. And the reason I say that is that those companies who got PPP loans in the United States were those companies who had updated financial statements. They had their year ends done through 2019 and 2018 and through February of 2020, which was the PPP requirement. And they didn't have to go scramble. So, you never know when your financial statements are going to be needed. And so those would be the three things that I would do and make sure that we do in 2021.
Absolutely. And it's not always popular advice, is it, Ruth? I mean, we've had a bit of a conversation before, and it's definitely something. I don't think a lot of people go into business because they love doing financials so much. Yeah. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on. An excellent point regarding the PPP loans, because it's obviously a good thing to have organized financials, to have organized, hopefully digital paper trails at this point, because you never know, when you might actually need it. It's a safety net. The same as with not having all your eggs in one basket, because you never know what might happen to an industry. And it's been a lesson learned for a lot of people. But I think that going into 2021, these lessons are definitely what's going to make businesses stronger. Definitely if you can pay attention to them and implement what you've learned. But moving forward, obviously, financials, you mentioned net profit per hour in a previous conversation, that's a concept that you really care about a lot. What has been your experience with business owners, with some successful examples, perhaps? What was something that surprised you about managers, business owners, and their attitude to financials? Like you said, and you smiled when I mentioned it, that perhaps it's not their favorite topic, but it's definitely something we should be talking about, right?
Absolutely. And I started smiling when you mentioned net profit per hour, because in 2004, I had working with a group of contractors who all pretty much had the same gross margins. And that's what we used to price on, gross margins. I did it too. And some of them were doing really well and some of them weren't. And it was like, okay, what's going on here? And then I realized, the light bulb went on for me that it's not only the gross profit line, but you have to consider overhead. So I developed the net profit per hour, which just really means that for every billable hour, how much drops to the bottom line and in terms of net profit. And so I asked, most of the contractors that I work with at that point, what net profit per hour do you want? And they give me the deer in the headlights stare. All right. So, it's like, okay, well, we've never thought about it this way before, because nobody had thought about it that way before. But when I started showing them the differences, some of them were doing really well from a net profit per hour basis, and some of them were earning like $2 and $3 net profit per hour. Why are you in business if you're only earning $2 or $3 net profit per hour? Life's too short. Go work at a fast food restaurant. You can make more and have a whole lot less headaches than earning $2 an hour. So, once we get through the understanding where it was, and they started really becoming profitable, because they started looking at not only net profit per hour, but, were all of their guys productive? Were their field personnel billable? I mean, how many hours a day were they actually billable? And that really translates down into the bottom line. And, and I'll never forget, one of my contractors I still work with, first visit, And I always ask the net profit per hour question, and I got, the deer in the headlights there. It's like, I don't know. All right, well, where do you want to start? And he goes, I don't know, it's $20 net profit per hour, too piggish. And I said, that's where you want to start. That's where we'll start, because I never tell a business owner what net profit per hour they should have. It's your business. You got to run it. You got to make sure that you're doing it from that perspective. So we started and we did the pricing and everything else like that around starting at $20 net profit per hour. We did a service rates, and this replacement rates and all the construction stuff that he did. And so I get an email about a month later, I think it was. And he goes, is $100 net profit per hour too piggish? And I started laughing. And I emailed him back and I said, okay, what's going on? He goes, I had a job that went really, really, really well. Murphy went to sleep. It was so profitable. Everything went right. And I was able to give a very large contribution to one of my favorite charities as a result of this. And I said, you finally get it. And he's like, what? I said, the more you earn, the more you can give away. And that's been my philosophy for years, but he got it. So he now looks at everything, depending upon whether it's residential or commercial. Residential pretty much is nothing less than $100 net profit per hour. But those are his numbers. They don't necessarily have to be your numbers. And commercial depends upon whether it's a high materials or a high labor job, depending upon where he goes from that perspective. And it's really fun because you become very profitable and you can give more away. And it doesn't have to be only to charities, but he has a phenomenal bonus program for all of his employees. And at the end of the year, he gives a piece of the profits to all of his employees because they've helped him do it. And they love their bonuses at the end of the year. So that's net profit per hour.
Absolutely. And then, of course, you end up with lower turnover because happy employees are, productive employees. They want to stick around for your business. You don't have to spend as much on training new employees. And I think that's a very important thing to mention, that charging the right price is very important. And there's no price that is right for two different companies. Like you mentioned, you have to take into account what your costs are. You have to take into account the kind of business that you want to run, the kind of customers that you want to target. Again, going back to the previous point, and especially, as I've mentioned, we always go price for profit, don't price for survival. You're not running a business to just make ends meet. You could just get a job and it would be a lot less stressful. But if you do want to thrive and if you do want to profit, it's really important not to set your prices according to competition. I think this is what we often see. Oh, because so-and-so is charging this amount, then I'm going to charge the same amount or $5 less, because then people are going to come to me because I charge lower prices. But then you can't pay your employees what you should be paying them. And then obviously the consequences that you don't end up with the best talent that you could be hiring, because obviously the best talent is going to go to the person who pays them. You end up with a certain, type of customer that perhaps isn't looking for any quality. All these consequences add up, and I think you definitely highlighted that it's important to make sure that you cover your back and make a profit.
Can I tell a story about that?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Tell any story, as many stories as possible. Tell me.
All right. So two guys started a business together, and they didn't look at their financials ever. The only thing that they worried about is if there was cash in the bank, and they could pay payroll, and they could take their discounts. So they grew from zero in revenue to $2 million in revenue in 12 years. All right. So they're growing and they're growing and they're growing and they're growing. And growth masks a lot of cash problems. So what happened was they hit $2 million and growth literally stopped. They were just like stuck at $2 million. And so they started having problems occasionally paying payroll and not being able to take their discounts. And they're like, oh, wait a minute, time out here. We're a $2 million company. We've never had this problem before, but they were smart enough to get help. So they called me on the phone and I went in, and after I did all the analysis, they were losing a nickel for every dollar that they took in the door for 12 years. Christina, they did exactly what you said. They said, if the competition is pricing here, I'm going to price it a little bit less because they'll come to us. And it funded their growth and it fueled their growth until it absolutely stopped. And so, you think, well, losing a nickel for every dollar that comes in the door. Yeah, it's really easy to do. Don't pay attention to materials. Don't pay attention to the productivity on the jobs. don't pay attention to the overhead that's associated with the job. It's really easy to lose a nickel, and it's really easy not to pay attention to it if you are not looking at your books and actually making sure that you are profitable. And so what we ended up doing, thankfully, we raised their rates about 10%, which quote unquote gave them a 5% net at that point. They're making a nickel rather than losing a nickel. And so many of their customers said to them, I said, we didn't know how you could provide such high quality work for as cheap as it was. And nobody went away. Nobody. And he goes, where were you 20 years ago? It was really funny.
Exactly. We already have statistics that show that customers generally, now they price convenience, they price quality of work above price, because definitely, as you mentioned, that's a very interesting story. You don't lose customers necessarily by raising your prices a little bit. Obviously, we're not talking about doubling prices overnight.
Yeah.
Just a reasonable increase. And I think if people are convinced that it's worth the money, then you're not going to be losing, at least you're not going to be losing the right customers, the people that are going to come back to you, that are going to recommend you. It's basic. And I think that's a story that really illustrates how important it is to prioritize. And this leads me to my next question. Obviously, prioritizing and setting the right margins is really going to be important in 2021 after the challenges we face. And since I understand that you don't believe in percentages as a measure of profitability or cost, how do you determine how much expense one should have in each category?
You're right. I don't believe in percentages because you can't take a percentage to the bank. You can't go to the teller at the end of the year and say, here's my 10% net profit. Would you deposit it in my savings account or in my checking account? It doesn't work. You cannot take a percentage to the bank. So the only thing you can take are dollars. So I look at everything from a dollars perspective. The only way I look at gross margins, which is gross profit divided by sales, is to make sure that they are consistent, because that's a warning sign that something's not right if they're not consistent. I don't particularly care what that percentage is. So what I do is I flip the P&L. All right. So normally when you're doing a budget, you start with, this is what I want to sell. This is what I expect my direct costs to be. This is what I want my gross profit to be. And I'm going to estimate my overhead at 35% or whatever else it is. Well, that in itself is a misnomer because, let's say you have two jobs. Each of them is, like $10,000, and 35% of $10,000 is $3,500, right? But one of those jobs takes 25 hours of labor and the other takes 2. It's not fair to assign both of them 35%. One of them used up a whole lot more labor, which means that a whole lot more overhead has to be assigned to it than the one that had only 2 hours of labor on it. So what I do is I start, what net profit per hour do you want? Then we look at what your overhead cost per hour is. And to determine your overhead cost per hour, all you're going to do is, since we're, at the end of 2020, beginning of 2021, it's easy. What was your overhead in 2020? How many billable hours did you have? So you divide the 2 and your overhead cost per hour. Unless you're a really, really, really big company, it's going to be somewhere north of $30 or $40 an hour. And so that means for every billable hour, you have to add 30, 40, 50, hopefully not 60, but whatever that number is. And so you take the net profit that you want per hour, you add the overhead cost per hour you want, and that gives you your gross profit per hour. Figure out how many hours the job's going to take, add your labor costs and your equipment costs and materials costs, and that is the selling price of the job. Now, there's commission that you may want to take into consideration. There is stuff like permits and subs and things like that too. But in the basics, this is how we do. We just take the P&L statement and flip it around so that we don't look at percentages. We look at actual dollars. And I think that if you do this, you're going to find some jobs that you thought were really profitable were not. And there's some jobs that you thought were not profitable that actually are. So go do it.
Exactly. And the more information you're able to draw from these kind of reports, I think the more power you're going to have to charge the right prices, to get paid, to engage your customers the right way. But definitely you also mentioned the existence of risks. And I think that's going to be something that a lot of people will be thinking about a lot more, obviously, since some people got burned, definitely in 2020. So what do you think are maybe three things that business owners could do to mitigate the risks of 2021? So like you said, obviously having transparent financials is important. But what else do you think could help people be perhaps better prepared for what's coming?
All right. So there are three things that, can help business owners be more prepared. The first point, you're absolutely right, being the financial side of things, having transparent financials. Number two would be to watch your labor. If you manage your labor well, you're probably going to be very profitable. If you don't manage your labor well, you're probably not going to be very profitable, because labor productivity, remember, it's net profit per hour. So for every billable hour, how much drops the bottom line? There's a ratio that I use called productivity ratio, which says that for taking payroll and payroll taxes and divide it by sales. And so if you do that and the number comes out to 60%, that means for every dollar that comes in the door, 60 cents goes to pay payroll and payroll taxes. And the higher the number, the worse the number is, okay? The lower the number, the better the number is, because they're being more productive from that perspective. So what you want to do is let everybody know what their compensation percentage is and post it. Put it up on the wall, because I find whatever gets tracked gets better. So the reality of the situation is, if it's 60% right now, which is really, really high, what can we do to make it 55 and make it fun and make it a game and make it something that they can actually do and see the results? Because if you increase your productivity, your bottom line will increase. All right. The third piece of it is, the third risk is actually materials risk. And materials risk is like inventory. Most employees think that the owners are made of money. It doesn't matter if they take 6 when they only need 2. I've also seen people fund their businesses with materials taken from their previous employers. So, leaving stuff on a job, it's just amazing. Inventory is a bet. If you pay attention to it, and this is where I find a lot of business owners don't do this. They start their business and go, I don't have to worry about inventory. Well, they get to be, $1.5, $2 million company, and they're still not tracking their inventory. I promise you, it's walking out the door at that point. It's not necessarily somebody who is stealing from you outright, but they're taking more than they need. They're leaving stuff on the job. Inventory is a bet. So the three would be transparent financial statements would be the first risk. The second risk to mitigate is labor. And the third risk to mitigate is materials or inventory.
It's amazing how much can be lost just by these little small leaks. As you've mentioned, it could be productivity, it could be materials. Definitely, we've also seen, for example, small debts and debt chasing. It's something that a lot of our clients complain about because, of course, when you let things slide through, they add up at the end of the day. And then, like you said, it might take a while. Like your previous client, you mentioned that it took them 12 years until their growth stopped. They're already a $2 million company, which is fairly successful. I'm sure everyone would agree. But, there has to be a point where the other shoe drops. And I think that's definitely, especially if you've been successful in the past, that's quite a hard thing to take into account and to realize that even though things have been going well, there are just leaks everywhere and your boat is going to start sinking at some point. And it's interesting, definitely, to see inventory specifically mentioned because, obviously it's again, not the most fun part of the job, but you got to do it if you want to be a business owner.
Yeah, there's another story with that one if you'd like.
I would definitely like to hear that. We talk a lot about inventory. We do have it's one of the things that we see clients struggling with, and we'd love to be able to help. What is the biggest one in your experience?
So a contractor calls me on the phone and says, I want you to come and help me build my service department. And what we do generally is I'll be there for 2 days. And at the end of the 2 days, I said to him, John, I'm happy to help you build your service department. We got to fix the hole going out the back door. He goes, what do you mean? Inventory is walking out the back door. So we closed up the back door. We started taking inventory, and it was painful. It was really incredibly painful. But when we figured it out, they had lost $500,000 in inventory. And John said to his employees, he said, I would much rather have given you the $500,000 in bonuses, but instead it walked out the door. And that's a lot of inventory. I mean, $500,000 in inventory. So everything was locked up, everything was closed, and then they lost less than 1% a year after that because the policies and procedures were in place. But can you imagine having to go to your employees and say, look, we lost $500,000 in inventory. I'd rather have given it to you in bonuses, but there's no bonus this year because this happened.
Yes, and it's not even malicious more often than not. The things that we've seen, and this was research that we did when we were building our own inventory management feature. So we saw the complaints that people had, that it wasn't necessarily, obviously, it's a really sad situation if you have employees that are actually actively taking material from you. But sometimes, like you said, it's just people taking six when they need to, leaving them on the job. Or we also saw trucks or vans becoming basically inventory on wheels, but nobody knows what exactly is in there. And then everyone places purchase orders for new items because they're not, where they're supposed to be on the shelf in the warehouse or wherever you're storing the materials. But they are there's 15 of them just rattling around in a truck. And of course, it's items that can get damaged. So that's also a loss. And the more you have, the more you lose. And like you said, it's basically keeping track of everything at the end of the day, just making sure that nothing slips out the back door. Although in that case, that was a very literal back door.
It was a literal back door. And the other piece of it is tools. We haven't talked about the tool sides. I mean, how many times they leave a ladder on a job? Or how many times do they leave, any one of their tools, their reclaim unit on a job? I mean, think about that. Somebody borrows somebody else's ladder. It's just, how many ladders do you buy a year? I mean, think about it just, as easy as that one is. And the way that I get around that one is I color all the trucks. So somebody has a blue truck, somebody has a green truck, somebody has a red truck, somebody has a purple truck, and their ladder has a spray paint with green if it's the green truck or, whatever. And all their tools that are company supplied have a dot of that color so that they stay on that truck. So if some of their guys borrow it, they know it goes back on the purple truck, for example. And that actually works. It's simple, but it works.
Exactly. And it's the same with software. It's the idea that you're keeping track, and at every single point in time, everyone knows where everything is. So if, let's say, Mike needs this item, a filter to change to service an HVAC appliance, he knows that perhaps it's not in his truck, but definitely it's in the warehouse. Or, for example, there is only one left, then somebody in the office can actually place a purchase order, and then it's items that you actually need, and you're also able to pay your vendors, obviously, because you're using them on a job that pays back. Moving forward, obviously, my last question for you is, where do you see the next 6 to 12 months going? Do you think there are new opportunities coming? I think we could all use a few new opportunities. So what would be your key actionable tips for 2021? 3 things a business owner should do as soon as they watch this video.
All right, 3 things a business owner should do as soon as they watch this video. Number 1, if your financial statements are not accurate, get them accurate. And you don't have to do the day-to-day bookkeeping. Your responsibility is to oversee them, look at the financials on a monthly basis, and make good decisions based on proper and accurate financial statements. Hire somebody to do the bookkeeping. You're not good at it. I hate doing it. I can do it. But the reality is you're better at selling or overseeing the business or whatever, not doing debits and credits. So number 1 is make sure that you get your business accurate in terms of your financial statements. Number 2, look for other opportunities for customers. Ask for referrals. I mean, if you have really satisfied customers, I bet they would give you a referral if you asked for it. And here's the easiest way to ask for referrals. You finish a job, 30 days later, call that person on the phone and say, Mrs. Jones, this is Ruth with ABC Heating and Air, just checking to make sure that your system is still operating properly. And they're going to go, who calls 30 days later, number 1? And then you make sure it's still doing well, number 1. If it's not, solve those issues. But, it should be. And you can say, Mrs. Jones, who have you talked to about your new system? You never ask the question, who do you know who might need one? You ask, Mrs. Jones, who have you talked to about your new system? Because no human being spends thousands of dollars and tells no one. And so, well, do you think, your sister would be as happy with the new system as you are? I don't know, call her. I mean, and this is an easy way to get referrals. So, number one, get your financials right. Number two is to get your referrals that you can for your existing customers. And it might put you off in a brand new direction with with another industry. Remember, no more than 20% of your business in any one particular industry or any one particular customer. So, I mean, that's number two. And number three is to talk to your employees. Say thank you. Give them reasons for contests. Have fun with them. We have been so socially isolated this year, and I'm hoping that all goes away. But, it would be cool to have a thank you barbecue that you can invite all of your family, your employees and their families to. Just something that we can do that would be fun in 2021, and say thank you for having, for being an employee and part of our company.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. I think this is something we all need a little bit more of in 2021, just spending quality time with people at work, and definitely creating an atmosphere where everyone feels like they're valued. Because I also, again, happy employees are productive employees at the end of the day. So it's in your advantage to do it. And I think there's I'm going to leave quite a few resources for our audience today, because you mentioned some really useful points, especially about inventory, especially about how to price, in order to make a profit and run a successful business, not just scrape by. So I think there's going to be quite a lot of useful information down in the description box for everyone watching, definitely. And I think it's easy to lose track of things. It's easy to lose track and to become a bit too focused on what's going on outside. But I think as long as you have a good understanding of your business, like you've mentioned, transparent financials, you know exactly what everything costs you, and you know exactly how much money you can afford to spend. Whenever times get tough, you need how much you should perhaps focus, on tightening things up a little bit. The important thing is to have the knowledge, and knowledge is power, and it gives you the ability to pivot. Like you've mentioned, some of the businesses that you've worked with, they were able to be more flexible because they knew exactly how long they could stretch. They knew exactly how much money was coming in, how much was going out, what kind of businesses they worked with. And indeed, is there anything else you'd like to add, Ruth? I think this has been a really good conversation.
I'm going to give you, if you do things by net profit per hour, as you just mentioned, where do you drop expenses? If your net profit per hour is normally $75 an hour, and I'm just pulling that number out of the air right now. I'm not saying it should be or anything like that, but things get tight. You may want to go down to 50. So that's a way that you can do it. Once you understand that numbers are there and percentages don't matter, you have power like you wouldn't believe, to be able to up and down where you want to take your business based on what net profit per hour you want. So, I had a client who did a net profit per hour at $5 an hour for a very large job. Now, he has to be very careful with labor, but that was the only way he could get the job. And he wanted this particular job because he did. And so that's what he bid it at, was not $5 net profit per hour, but there was like 1,000 hours on it or more than that. I can't remember how many hours there were on it. So you have control at that point. So, and you do a lot with an inventory module. You can very easily help everybody make sure that they keep track of their inventory. Yes, exactly. And there we have it, folks. This was Ruth King. She's definitely been very insightful, and I think everyone could benefit from listening to so many stories. I'm sure you have so much more, and I wish we could cover all of them. But even now, you've heard it. Go out, check your inventory, check your financials, definitely. Make sure you're making as much money as you need and as much money as you want. But always keep in mind that it's important to be flexible. Thank you very much, Ruth. Thank you. My pleasure. Thank you for having me. And there you have it, folks. Ruth King, HVAC consultant. You can always find her at ruthkinghvac.com or click the link down below in the description box. Don't forget to like this video, leave some feedback in the comments, and subscribe to our channel. I'm Christina, Marketing Executive at Commusoft, and I hope to see you next time.